right, hello, and welcome to the AT&T Cyber Threat Report. This is April 26, 2012, and joining us today we have first Jim Clausing. Jim is one of our key malware analysts and security analyst as well. He also is a participant in the community with security industry groups as well. Welcome, Jim, and do you have some topics to discuss today?
Yes, Brian. Today I had a quick little update on the NICJU mass SQL injection that I talked about last week. I did a little more looking at it, so I wanted to let you know what I found out. And then I also wanted to talk about an Oracle TNS listener exploit that it's a vulnerability that's apparently been around for quite a while, like maybe a decade or more. And the details on the exploit just became public, so I wanted to talk a little bit about that, what it entails, and some workarounds if you've got Oracle databases that you might want to make sure you've got in place.
Yeah, it sounds like some good plans there. You know, something that comes to mind, I know it's probably a little less a big keyword that was in the industry for a while, and you still hear it from time to time, is this notion of 0 days. And, you know, it's kind of amazing how many times we run across exploits that aren't anywhere near 0 days. We knew about the vulnerability for a very long time, but for some reason they're still around. So that should be some good discussion. Dave Gross is joining us today. Dave is a senior incident response analyst. He does a whole pile of things related to security, as well as developing analysis tools and providing advice in many of our projects. Welcome, Dave, and do you have something to discuss today?
Thanks, Brian. Yes, I wanted to talk about something that was disclosed this past Monday, that VMware source code for ESX has been stolen and published, and so I want to talk about some of the implications of that.
That should be interesting. And I feel compelled to ask, how senior are you?
I've been here for quite a while, Brian.
Quite a while. Yeah,
I'm a fixture here, I think.
Well, we certainly appreciate your experience. And I'm Brian Rexroad. I'll cover the internet weather, and I guess what we'd like to do today is start with a little bit of feedback on some viewer mail. Over the last week, two things happened. The DNS Changer topic, which we've discussed many times in the past, made it into sort of the mainstream press. And I think this is a bit of an effort from the DNS Changer working group to try to make sure that people are aware that if they have been affected by DNS Changer, that the temporary servers that are helping to sustain their internet access will be going away on July 9th. The court order that allows those servers to be operated not by FBI but on behalf of the FBI, so to speak, will be expiring at that point. So the servers are scheduled to be turned off.
And that was already an extension from the original deadline, correct?
Absolutely right. Yes, that was an extension from what was originally March 8th, and the original takedown of the rogue servers, the ones that were doing bad things, was back in November of 2011. So the temporary servers were there to help notify people of those infections, and many of the major ISPs and hopefully smaller ISPs as well are busy doing that. But as I said, it got out into the mainstream press, and that has driven a lot of folks to be looking around for information to make sure that they understand the situation and are trying to clean things up. And a viewer came across one of our past topics discussing this and gave us some feedback. So we certainly welcome that feedback, and in the course of doing that, some questions were asked about, how to make sure that their system was clean or check to see if it's clean and what protections were needed. So with that, the first thing that you can do is, if you have any suspicion that you might be affected by DNS Changer, is very quickly just go to www.dns-ok.us. The link is shown here. And what will happen is if you go to that page, it will check to see if you're using the rogue DNS servers. And the way it does that is if you're using what were the temporary servers, what used to be the rogue servers, if you're using those addresses for DNS resolution, it's going to give you one answer and point you to a particular IP address. And if you're using any other DNS servers on the Internet, it's going to point you to a different page. And, of course, you want the green result. If you get a red result, that means that you are using the temporary DNS servers that used to be the rogue servers, and you'll want to pay attention to that. Now, there are certain circumstances where that doesn't work quite properly. It's probably not worth going into the details here, but it is at least a good quick check. You know, along the lines, if you want to see, to get more information about DNS Changer, there is a DNS Changer working group website. That's www.dcwg.org. That is a nonprofit industry group that is completely staffed by volunteers that are interested in helping with this problem, and that is with information and notification information. There are organizations that are part of that help to distribute and operate those temporary DNS platforms, and so good place for information, generally speaking. If you're an AT&T subscriber, or broadband subscriber, there are a couple of things that are available in addition. First of all, we are in the process of doing notifications. That is for users that appear to be affected by DNS Changer. We're providing notifications to those folks. That applies in our consumer space as well as business subscribers as well. So if you hear from us, please pay attention to that, because that is intended to help you, notify you that there may be an issue. And if you are a broadband subscriber, we have in what's called the AT&T Internet Security Suite. It's powered by McAfee. It is basically McAfee antivirus internet security package that's available for some subscribers. For the upper tier subscribers, for free for download, and then there's a monthly subscription fee if you're at one of the low-end levels of service. And it is bandwidth related. And then last but not least, there is information that you can get from the AT&T subscriber website. I'm showing a little clip of it here. That site is www.att.net. Go to the support page, and from the support page, you can find information about Internet security from there. And that has lots of helpful information, including how to configure your residential gateway or your DSL modem with firewall features that are on there if you want to restrict some of those capabilities and make sure that it's configured correctly, as well as getting additional information about setting up your email and being wary of phishing attacks, that sort of thing. So a good resource to go to if you're so inclined. Now, one of the other things I thought would be useful to discuss here today is this putting DNS Changer into context. It has made the mainstream media. There's lots of information available about DNS Changer. There's lots of activity to try to get that remediated, and in some sense for good reason. Because when those temporary servers go away, anybody that's continuing to be affected will effectively lose their Internet access, because DNS resolution isn't going to work any longer. But to put it into some context with some numbers here, I took a quick look at a couple of other sort of actually current examples. Approximately 340,000 unique addresses are using the DNS Changer temporary servers today. And so that's a pretty good indication of how many users are affected. The number of actual affected users may be a little bit smaller than that, because addresses change for different users throughout the day. But to put it into context, the Conficker working group, which is another nonprofit industry working group, has been tracking Conficker infections back since, I think it was November 2008. Does that sound right to you, Dave and Jim?
Something in that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think so. This has been around for almost 4 years now, 3.5 years, and there still are a variety of variations or variants of Conficker that are out there. And the Conficker Working Group still tracks the numbers, and as of, I think it was April 24th, a couple of days ago, there were still 2.7 million unique addresses checking in, based on indicating that they're infected with Conficker A and B, or A or B, or possibly both. And then Conficker C is showing about 27,000 additional unique addresses. There may be some overlap in there, but there are certainly perhaps some unique ones as well checking in. And then another example, this recently discovered Mac exploit called Flashback. A piece of malware has been discovered, and there's in fact apparently or at least possibly a variation of that has developed, showing on the order of about 820,000 affected users. That is, even though some activities have been done to patch these machines, it appears that there are still quite a number of those that are affected. The number doesn't seem to be going down very much. So there are a couple of reference pages here based on that are used for the information that's posted here. You can see the URLs associated with that. But I guess, Dave or Jim, do you have any other thoughts? What other kinds of things sort of put these things into context?
Well, I think the numbers do a good job here. The big thing is when those DNS servers get turned off, the people that are still infected are going to notice it then. If they don't know it before then, they'll notice it then. And so, people need to be ready for calls to customer service, that kind of thing. But the numbers, 340,000 is a big number, but it's all relative. There are millions of users, home users, business users on the Internet at any given time. So, yeah, it made some noise in the press this week, but it isn't anything, the sky's not falling. It's not like you need to panic. And the users who don't get themselves remediated between now and July, they'll know it for sure on July 9th, July 10th.
Right. And the other thing I was going to say is a lot of these are somewhat on the way down. I mean, Conficker had been estimated maybe in the 9 to 15 million. Now it's been remediated on many systems, but there are a lot that are still infected. And the same thing with DNS Changer. I mean, 340,000 is what we're down to today, but there were, it was over a million or more, right, Brian, when we were first looking at that? Well,
you bring up a good point, Dave. One of the things that I'm very much a skeptic of, and you're well aware of this in our previous analysis, that is, measuring the number of infected users is a very tricky thing to do. And it has to do with, network address translation, that you can have multiple machines affected behind a network address translation, and the fact that many services assign addresses very dynamically, some very more dynamically than others. So counting addresses can be very hazardous. So to put that into context, in the original estimates associated with DNS Changer, yes, they said it was about 4 million that were affected, but that was based on a count of the unique addresses that were visiting those DNS servers over the course of an entire week. And as it turns out, that if we use the numbers that are shown here, the 340K, dating back to the original time period around November, the number was about 550,000. So it certainly has come down, but this is one where there has been much more effort in trying to bring those numbers down. And in addition to that, there are some cases where, in fact, some of the traffic is being diverted intentionally and appropriately, in some cases, away from those DNS servers. So the actual numbers of infections may be, in fact, a little higher.
Yep. And
that's a sort of an important aspect of this. That is to make sure that the numbers that are used relative to measurements are consistent. And you bring up a good point here. I would say the reduction here is probably on the order of about 30%, or perhaps a little bit less, maybe 20% since November, in terms of having remediated those, specifically for DNS Changer.
Right, and the other thing I was going to point out was that with an infection like DNS Changer, taking out the central point, which we usually call the command and control, is more devastating on the DNS Changer systems because they're going to lose the ability to resolve any address, whereas these other infections, the configure and flashback and so on, those are infections that tend to do their malicious activity in the background, and they don't affect normal traffic.
Absolutely true. So, in fact, that's sort of twisting this just a little bit differently. Configure, for the most part, I think is believed to have been what I'll call inoculated. That is, a huge amount of effort went into making sure that the command and control associated with configure infections could not be activated. And that was not an easy feat because configure did have some pretty strong sophistication around that. DNS Changer is very similar in the sense that basically replacing those DNS servers, as you were referring to, with the temporary service, basically inoculated. That is, the bad things that it had the potential to do were stopped. In fact, in the DNS Changer case, they arrested some folks that were associated with doing click fraud. But I think, by the same token, a lot of the infections that are out here, some that aren't represented here, or perhaps even the flashback. I'm not sure that the flashback has been entirely inoculated at this point. That is, I don't think they've taken control of all the command and control associated with that. And there are lots of other infections. These are just a few examples that are happy-go-lucky, taking advantage of users executing denial of service attacks, stealing identity information, conducting bank fraud, that type of thing. So that's a little different, isn't it?
Yeah.
Absolutely. So anyway, that was what I had to share with you here. Why don't we go ahead and pass this to Jim, and let's talk a little bit about some of the, I think you had an update and a new exploit to discuss.
Yep. The update, we talked a little bit about the mass SQL injection, the NICJU, last week, and at that point in time, I hadn't really figured out what, traced the exploit, try to figure out what it does. And I did a little bit of that work since our last broadcast, and as expected, it does a couple levels of redirection, and what I was able to trace was ultimately a Java exploit for, excuse me, relatively recent versions of Java, but it would have worked in a lot of different browsers, so it wasn't specific to any particular browser. It was a Java exploit. Now that I talk about it, I don't remember exactly what it did after that, but it was redirecting to another site in Eastern Europe. The final one was in Poland, and I should have probably put a slide together with the domain names so that you could block those if you were interested. Didn't do that. I apologize for that. But there are still, as we were saying last week, I think there were over 200,000 that I had found last Thursday There are still a good 150+ thousand sites that seem to have this script injected into them. And again, I still don't know what weakness they found in these various sites to do the SQL injection in the first place. And that's something that I will attempt to do some more research on, contact some of my contacts out there and see if we can figure out what that is, because that's really the place to concentrate. But the malicious activity caused by this was a Java exploit, and if you're allowing Java to excuse me, if you're allowing Java to execute in your browser, a lot of people would have been vulnerable to this in a drive-by kind of a fashion. Well, that was the update I wanted to mention this week.
Okay.
The other thing that I really wanted to talk about this week, though, we mentioned the Oracle batch of patches. I don't remember whether that was last week or the week before. And we've talked about this at various times in the past, especially with patches to the Oracle database. As a former DBA, I know I was very slow to apply patches because the big concern was, would these patches break existing applications? And the applications were things that, the business depended on. So Oracle databases were one of those things that were always slow to get patched. Mm-hmm. Well, there's now there was word that a vulnerability in the Oracle TNS listener process may have been patched with the April bundle of Oracle patches. And so there was some discussion of this on the full disclosure mailing list was one of the places this got discussed, but it was discussed a few other places. And so the guy who originally found what was known as the TNS poison vulnerability and exploit is, I'm probably going to butcher the pronunciation of his name, but I think it's Yoshin Koret or something like that. It turns out that this patch cluster did not actually patch it in existing versions, but the details of the exploit are now out there, which is why I thought it was important that we at least touch on it here. For those not familiar, the TNS listener is the Oracle process that listens for incoming database connections and then figures out where to send it. It sort of is a proxy, a redirector. It listens for the incoming TCP connections on port 1521, and then based on which database you claim you're trying to connect to, it figures out where to send that connection on the backside. Mm-hmm. And the issue is that in default configurations, a client can send a registration request to register a new listener on the server. And what the result of that is, and this diagram comes out of Yoshin's paper, the result of it is if you allow the dynamic registration, you could create a second instance of any database you wanted, and you could then steal up to 50% or 75% of the connections. You wouldn't get them all because the original listener is still there. But basically, the TNS listener process can serve as a front end, for redundant databases. So it could send connections to different servers on the backside. So essentially, what the attacker is doing is pretending to be the database on the backside and able to become a man in the middle and hijack some number of the incoming connections and then send them on to the real database. So what they would then be able to do is insert whatever malicious queries or whatever they want into the database traffic. They can steal, credentials. They could insert new queries and steal the results, as long as could, for whichever of the connections ended up getting redirected through them. The paper that the URL shown here is the paper that describes this, but this was also described, as I said, on the full disclosure mailing list, so the details are out there. There are a few workarounds. The biggest one is if you don't need it, you can turn off allowing the dynamic registration. And if you can, you should do that. That's the easiest one. If you have to allow, if you've got the redundant databases and you have to allow the listener to redirect to multiple different instances of the same database, there are some other ways you can work around this. The easiest one is if you've got the what is it called? The advanced security option or something like that. If you turn on encryption of SSL or TLS encryption of the TNS listener connection, then you'd have to steal the certificates from the listener. So that tends to limit the ability of this exploit. But this is potentially a big deal if you've got your Oracle databases exposed in places where the attacker might be able to contact them directly. Now, in a lot of production environments, database itself is going to be hidden. You're going to have some other sort of application front end, and hopefully you're not allowing direct access to your Oracle databases from the internet. But anyway, so a couple of possible workarounds should really be seriously considered if you manage Oracle databases.
So, yeah, absolutely. So, Jim, help me understand a little bit here. I'm taking a look at the paper. The paper dates back to 2008, perhaps 4 years ago.
Yeah, well, and that's when he discovered it and reported it to Oracle.
Right.
It's taken almost 4 years for Oracle to claim that they're going to fix it, and what they've told him is that they'll fix it in future versions of the database.
Right, I understand.
And that was the confusion. He thought they had fixed it with this patch cluster, but the vulnerability exists back to a version Oracle 8i, which dates back to like 1999,
right?
Something like that. So the vulnerability has been out there for quite a while.
So is the new development that an exploit has been demonstrated, or had the exploit been demonstrated previously? Is that the new development here, or?
Well, the new development is that the details on the exploit are now public. Yeah, he had written up this paper and kept it private until he thought it had been patched. And when he thought it had been patched, then, okay, now that it's patched, it's safe to get out there. After the information got out there, then some clarification from Oracle that, no, it's going to be fixed in future versions, but existing versions, 8i, 9i, 10G, and 11G, are all still vulnerable. In their default configuration, they allow dynamic registration. So the folks who manage these databases should take a look at the paper and put the workarounds in place.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, good point, Jim. And so the issue here is that a paper was published. It described the vulnerability. The author of the paper thought it was kept private. It was shared with Oracle. The author of the paper thought that the vulnerability had been repaired, published the paper, and consequently found that it had not been. So it was apparently a communications misunderstanding between the author and Oracle in this case. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, that's unfortunate, but mistakes like this happen occasionally, and so obviously users are going to want to be wary of that. And I can say, as a fact, I'm looking at the report here. It refers to port 1521. This is one that we are not actively scanning right now. I haven't really looked at if there's any change in activity, but it certainly is one that has been scanned in the past, potentially looking for Oracle databases that might be exploitable.
Yeah, and I have one of my honeypots has a fake listener on port 1521, and I get probes there at least 3 or 4 times a month. I'll get probes on that, and this is a machine that has never actually had a database on it, has never been advertised anywhere as having a database on it. It's just I put a listener on that port, and I get queries that are definitely looking for TNS listeners or Oracle databases. So there is some background noise level of activity scanning for that out there all the time.
Absolutely.
And I just want to point out that having a vulnerability open for 4 years is quite a long time. That does have users' databases potentially exposed, and the author of the paper may not be the only one that knows about this. Other people may have discovered that as well. So, just because he held off and then finally disclosed it doesn't mean that it hadn't been being taken advantage of up to this point.
Exactly, especially with a vulnerability that appears to date back as far as this one does. It's possible that other people have found this as well. So that's the big reason for bringing it up now.
Absolutely.
Hopefully they'll do a quick job of finding workarounds and fixing it now that it's more public.
Absolutely. All right, very good, Jim. That's actually sort of a unique situation. Glad you brought it up. Let's go ahead and move over to Dave here. Dave, you'd mentioned something about some source code getting out into the public domain.
Yes, thanks, Brian. This past Monday, April 23rd, some source code from VMware ESX hypervisor was published. Evidently, the code was stolen. It was published by somebody that called himself Hardcore Charlie, this hacker, and he claims that he stole it from China National Import and Export Corporation. They denied that their servers were breached, but regardless of where the source was obtained, some of the source code was published. That was verified by VMware. VMware did say that it was one file from the source code, so it wasn't the whole source code, it was just a single file, and they claim that this file dates back to 2003-2004 timeframe. So we don't know. I mean, there's a lot of changes that get made in various pieces of code, but a lot of times some of the old code does remain. It's just different improvements and as bug fixes need to be made and stuff like that. And the problem with the source code being out there isn't an immediate issue that now suddenly it's VMware is very vulnerable, but now it gives the hackers the opportunity to look more carefully for bugs that may be less obvious, just attacking it as a black box. So it gives them more of a leg up in terms of finding a way to compromise or subvert the protections that VMware provides. So it's not a situation where the sky is falling and stuff like that, but something that we should be aware of, keep our eye on the VMware, and be maybe a little bit more vigilant about looking at the error logs and other things to see if there's anything suspicious going on until we find out more about what's being disclosed. But any of these virtualization kind of software environments are becoming more and more of a target now because of the cloud architectures and the situations where there's more of the infrastructure being converted over to virtual machines. And just as a side note, Hardcore Charlie said in his Twitter feed that he also has code for some EMC products, and he may post that at a later date. So he might be posting more of the VMware stuff. He might post some EMC stuff. We'll wait to see what happens there. But I just wanted to make the viewers aware that at least a piece of the VMware code has been published.
Yeah, so this actually gets into a few kind of an interesting discussions. Of course, there's the classic debate about the security benefits or ramifications of both open source versus proprietary or closed source code repositories. And so basically what this does is forces it into sort of the open source mindset to some extent. I guess this is a case where you don't know how much has been stolen. You don't know if somebody has hacked in and gotten all of the proprietary code. So it's really the worst of both worlds. That is, in the open source world, the presumption is everybody gets to review it, and you have a better chance that somebody's going to identify vulnerabilities, and that is supposed to offset the opportunity to do exploits. Whereas in the proprietary state, you're depending on the secrecy of that repository to make sure that folks don't have an inside track on being able to create those exploits. But if it's a case where the code's been stolen, it's only the bad guy that has it.
Right.
And it basically what it does is it changes the way you attack it a little bit.
Yep.
When it's a black box, you're going to fuzz it, send all kinds of random garbage, throw it at it, and see if something breaks. Whereas when you have the source code, now you can actually target specific areas of the code.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not necessarily an easy thing, even if you've got the source code, to create the exploits, unless you're really good at it.
Yeah,
so, but as Dave said, it's certainly something you now want to keep your eye on. As soon as VMware releases patches for ESX, you want to seriously consider applying them in short order, because the bad guys have this, at least some version of it.
Absolutely true. And in fact, some users may not even be aware that they're using VMware. Many cloud services or a lot of the server farms or hosting services that are provided now, there are actually virtual machines that are provided. And for folks that may not already be aware of this, that's one of the tools that's available for providing these virtual machines is, in fact, the VMware set of processes. It's the underlying structure that provides those virtual machines that you can configure and sort of treat as a piece of hardware when, in fact, you're sharing a piece of hardware with several others. Another sort of characteristic of this or sort of tangent on this topic, there was a recent, I'm not sure if it was a quote, but paraphrasing from Richard Clark. Richard Clark has previously was, I think, what they referred to as the cybersecurity czar for the White House, that is representing the White House administration, I think, during the Bush administration. And he's recently noted as having said that basically every major corporation has been compromised. And so on one hand, this is a specific case where some source code has been stolen, but if you take a look and do a little research on these topics, even many of the security organizations that are, their businesses around security have been compromised and information stolen from them that would be critical to the security of the services they provide or the security of the tools that they provide. This will be right along the lines of those as well. So I guess the question becomes, can you expect any software that you get to be any more secure than, whether it's been known to be stolen or not? I'm still an advocate that we should be looking at, not depending on any piece of software for the security, that is building layers that will help protect against any particular failure scenario. Very difficult thing to do, but certainly an objective to try to keep working toward.
Right.
So with that, perhaps we can move over to the Internet Weather Report, our regular report for the week, and look at some of the things that are going on. And we'll go ahead and start with a little bit of background on or some recent activity associated with denial of service attacks. That's basically what we're looking at is activity that's affecting specific address blocks. So we'll take a quick look at that graphically in a moment here. We have some ports that we've looked at before. There aren't really any new ones here, but we'll take a look at how that activity is changing. Port 6257, that's the WinMX peer-to-peer application. We've seen the scanning activity. We talked a little bit about security cameras last week that appear to be associated with port 210. We'll take a look at what's going on there. I'll give you a quick update. We're seeing scanning activity on port 2967. And then there's some others that sort of, I think, fit into a grouping here is scanning activity on port 1080, 90, 80, 89, and 8085. Not all related to the same actors necessarily, but certainly have some similarities in the sense that it looks like they're looking for open proxies and activity of that sort. There are a couple other graphs I'd like to show you a little bit later related to what I describe as more persistent activity, whereas these are the anomalies. So let's go ahead and start. First, I'm showing 30 days of activity here. The last 30 days related to what we detect as anomalies, and this is specifically anomalies in flow activity over the last 30 days, and that would be akin to something like a SYN flood, whereas attempts to make connections are being repeatedly made, and that basically generates a new connection request, and large numbers of those can load down servers, load down firewalls, or if you do it enough, you can even plug bandwidth, although it's not one of the most efficient ways to do it. There are roughly 20 different entities that are shown in this graph that is not necessarily distinct targets, but certainly ones that are have some level of independence associated with those. And an interesting observation here is there seems to be a little bit of an upward trend in the last few weeks relative to frequency and persistence associated with those attacks. Hopefully this isn't a developing trend overall, but there does certainly seem to be a little bit of a change here. I don't have a clear explanation for that. And secondly, is that there have been some certainly large attacks, and notably the ones in turquoise here. The tops of these are actually clipped off the top of the graph. I didn't think they were significant to show exactly how big they were, but two sort of interesting observations that there is sort of an upward trend that's taking place. So the reason I bring this up is because there is often what I'll describe as skepticism. There are a few sets of denial of service attacks that actually make it into the news. I can assure you that there are actually quite a number that don't make it into the news, and our operations teams and our DDoS defense teams are continuously active and helping to mitigate attacks for customers that subscribe to that service. So it's good to be prepared and not caught by surprise in cases like this. Next item, no real significant developments here. This is what appears to be consistent with peer-to-peer activity on port 6257 UDP. The port is registered or associated with WinMX, which is a peer-to-peer file sharing protocol. We're showing 60 days of data here. Now, what's significant is this activity starts and stops, and there is a clear demographic in terms of the participants in this peer-to-peer activity. Mostly European. I've previously been reporting as European, but it's clearly Germany, France, Italy. There are some other exception cases, some U.S. participants in Japan. And again, I keep reporting it's not clear if this had any security significance, although the fact that it turns on and turns off and that there is sort of a clear demographic associated with it does sort of raise a level of suspicion, and we'll leave it at that. Next item here, source scanning. There's the number of sources scanning on port 210 TCP. We've been reporting this for a few weeks. Last week we had a rather, what I describe as significant discussion on some developments associated with this. And one clarification I wanted to make. I think last week we were referring to it as webcams. Technically, I don't think it's really webcams that we're talking about here. This is really a security camera DVR, and we may have discussed it in that context, but we believe this activity to be associated with a security camera DVR. It's actually marketed in a few different brand names that we've been able to identify. We have not been able to get in contact with the provider of that at this point. We're still gathering evidence associated with this. But most of the sources that is the participants of this are in China, U.S., and Korea. And the sources that are scanning on port 210 also appear to be scanning on port 23, which is one of the sort of updates that we wanted to provide. That is, this appears to be, it may be an extension of something that has been around for some time. So folks here, Dave and Jim, you're probably well familiar with Cybot, which was a botnet that was effectively built from infecting DSL modems and small routers. Many of these devices have basically a very small Linux image on them, and if you can get past the sort of the interface to it, open a shell to that Linux image, you can actually install software, malware in this case, activate a firewall, that sort of thing. And that certainly was a case with the Cybot botnet, and there was another one called Chuck Norris that was sort of a minor variant of the same kind of thing. And this appears to be along the same flavor, perhaps a different attack vector, but has certainly some similarities. We don't know if it's related to the same group or not. So that's a continuing development. Next item here is increases in scanning probes on port 2967. We've been reporting this for some time now. It's associated with a vulnerability that existed a long time ago, I think, again, dating back 2008, 2009, associated with Symantec antivirus that's been patched since. But for some reason, somebody's interested in continuing to scan on this port. There may be other reasons that they're doing this scanning. That is, there may be other reasons, but in any case, we're showing 180 days of data, and there does seem to be sort of an increasing trend in sort of what I'll describe as activity on this port. That is, it's still associated with just a single source of doing that scanning, but the frequency of events that's taking place, and a little bit, to some extent, that there is an increase in the aggressiveness of that scanning activity. So that continues to take place, and therefore we're reporting it. Next item here, this is a little bit different. We just had a short period of what I would describe as periodic, that is daily scanning activity. Actually, it would have been, it looks like it's more like hourly here. I should be more correct about that. We're showing 30 days of activity, and over the last week or so, a number of alerts, specifically between about the 17th and the 22nd of April, it looks like there were a number of probes on port 1080 TCP. 1080 TCP is associated with SOX. It is basically an application proxy application, and the significant probes here were associated with a single source from a hosting provider that is a machine at a hosting provider in Canada, most likely somebody that had malicious intent, was able to gain access to that machine and do those probes anonymously. Next item here is one that we're familiar with from several weeks past. We call this the rainbow chart. We detected a scanning activity on port 90 and port 8089 TCP. And if we look back at the sources that were doing that scanning, this is actually just a few sources coming from China. And the two sources do appear to be related, but here it is. They are also flagged as scanning a number of other ports: port 81, port 90, port 8081, port 8086, port 8088, port 8089, port 8090, and port 8888. So the graph that's shown here basically shows a composite of all those, and you can see that there's very much a similar profile as it changes ports through different days of the week or different weeks of the year. Next item is somewhat similar, related to the one that we reported last week. Last week, the anomaly that we had detected was scanning activity on port 3681 TCP, and we were able to associate it with the scanning activity on port 6515 as well as port 8085. And so you can see here, it looks like the amount of scanning activity is actually tapered down. You can see where it was around, I guess, April 12th or so here, where the activity on port 3681 was introduced into the scanning activity, and more recently, port 8085 is showing up in that activity as well. So aggressiveness going down, but certainly the activity is diversifying across some different ports here. And you can see this is clearly related in the sense that where there are drops in scanning activity at one port, it drops on all the ports, which could be perhaps a server outage or they're changing the application or something along those lines. Next item is basically to look at our regular pie chart. No surprises on this particular one, although I thought that it might be worth pointing out. Well, first of all, 445 is right at the top of the list. This is associated with Confictor activity. There are some botnets that mimic Confictor in terms of its attempt to do exploits, oftentimes propagating through accessing file shares that are not protected with good passwords. Activity on 1433 TCP, that's the Microsoft SQL database. There's always scanning activity on port 80 looking for web servers that might not be accessible or noticeable through searches, but certainly would be accessible through a port scan. And one that I thought would be worth pointing out is this port 27977 TCP. And this is one we had talked about a few weeks ago, perhaps a month ago, and we're going to take a little closer look at that in the next view graph here. But others that are notable, standard ones, port 22, port 23, 3389, that's remote desktop protocol, and then port 8080, that's a alternative web port. And in fact, the sources that are scanning on port 80 and port 8080 are pretty much the same list of sources that are doing the scanning. And I think we have identified there's basically a worm propagating on that port, and there was a major cloud service provider that seems to be affected by it. It could be the applications on that cloud service provider, but nevertheless, a number of machines showing up. So port 27977, this is looking at the past 90 days of activity on that port, and clearly there's an upward trend starting around about mid-February. Prior to that point, there really wasn't much scanning at all on this port. Since then, it's gone up, and we're actually looking at the number of sort of flows or probes that we're picking up on the port. It's gone up from, just to give a reference point, around the middle of March, we were at about just under 7.5 million probes per hour at peak, and now we're up around 25 million probes per hour. So it's a significantly upward trend here. It looks like this has the properties of a slowly propagating worm. I don't know for a fact that that's the case. In fact, I think, there's a note here. There's not a significant growth in the number of sources that are doing that scanning. So I'm going to retract my statement about worm, but there certainly is growing interest in scanning on this port. We did find a reference in searching on the internet to the possibility that this port is related to an open proxy port in the TDSS malware. I have not been able to verify that, but that's one possibility that is just simply looking for open proxies that can be used for other activities such as spamming or anonymization of attack activity. The next item is looking at the most sources that are probing on ports. As always, port 445 far and above, again, associated with configure and related activity. We have some ports that show up in here that are not security related. That 3074 is actually registered to Xbox, 32702 and 27015 are all considered innocuous peer-to-peer activities. A couple of others we've already talked about. One notable different one is this 1562. We had talked about that previously as well. I'll just make a quick note. Port 23 is on this list as well, but we're going to take a quick look at 1562 and how that's been trending over time. And looking over the last 180 days, this is an interesting one in the sense that it's associated with P-Connect Manager. I don't know what P-Connect Manager is. I've looked around a little bit. There is a piece of software that's associated with, looks like computer-aided design that has a P-Connect name. It didn't seem to have any relationship to networking, so I couldn't directly associate it with this port. And then there's another application that's actually a function associated with Microsoft SQL that is actually, in fact, it's associated with PHP, that is a connection capability to MySQL databases. And the P in this case, in that case, is between MySQL and PHP is a persistent connection. The idea is that if you're going to make lots of connections to a database, it'll set up a persistent connection so that you can continue to manage that. Now, I didn't find any direct associated with port 1562, so I don't know if that's the case, but certainly may be the possibility. What's interesting here is that there has been an upward trend in the number of sources that are doing the scanning. That's not what we're graphing here. We're actually showing the number of flows that are scanning on this port. And going back to about August of last year, August 25th is when the scanning activity started. There was a significant upward trend in the counts around the middle of January of this year. And it seems to have sort of leveled off. There's been a little bit of a dip in there. And another sort of notable point is that there was a very distinct gap in the scanning activity. That is, it turned off entirely and then turned back on again. So that may have been some sort of an update that was done in the malware that's doing this. It's a very strong indicator of a botnet in that there are many sources that are scanning. I think we're up around 900 or so sources that we detect in an hour. And those all turned off at the same time in the course of this activity. So it appears that it's one set of actors, so to speak, that are doing this, that are under the same sort of command and control. We don't have a specific command and control associated with this, but this is clearly has the properties of worm that's under someone's control. And with that, I think that pretty much covers our topics for today. And I'd like to, first of all, provide some reminder information about how to contact us. If you'd like to give us any suggestions for the program, topics you think we should cover, questions, that type of thing, please contact us at cyberthreat@list.att.com. I'd also like to call your attention that some of us do have some topics posted on the networking exchange blog.att.com. Just /topics/security, and Jim Clausing Jim Boxmeyer and myself also have some things published there. If you'd like to get this program, it's available at the techchannel.att.com. In fact, we had a viewer that had asked a question about how to subscribe to these videos. There is an RSS feed available for the Tech Channel, not specifically for this program, the Cyber Threat Report, but you can use a local rule or a local filter to filter out just the ones that you want if you subscribe to the Tech Channel RSS feed. You also may find that there are other things on the Tech Channel that interest you, so that's available. It's also available on YouTube, from iTunes, and from FeedBurner. And with that, just open up quickly. Are there any final comments from the group here? All right. Well, thanks for joining us, and thank you, Jim, and thank you, Dave, for joining today. And from all of us, thanks for watching, and keep your network safe.